Welcome to the Paleo Post Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Chaggy, founder of the world of paleoanthropology. Join us as we journey through time to uncover the secrets of human evolution. Each episode, we delve into the groundbreaking discoveries, fascinating research, and the stories of our ancient ancestors. From the latest fossil finds to in-depth discussions with the leading experts, the Paleo Post Podcast brings the past to life. Whether you're a seasoned researcher or just curious about where we come from, there's something here for everyone. So let's explore our incredible human origins together.
Hello, everybody. We are back with what is this, episode 7 of season 3 of the Paleo Post Podcast? I can't believe that. I mean, wow, we are almost done with season 3 already. Can you believe that, guys? What a fun time it has been.
I know it has been. Yeah. No, go ahead, George. I'm blabbering as usual.
I was just saying, I can hear Father Christmas knocking on my door.
I know. Well, especially with your nice traditional house, that looks like the kind of place that Santa would want to come kick it.
Oh, I know, right? Once again, George, how old is your home?
It goes back to 1587. That's based on the dendrochronology I did on the timbers here. So it's remarkable. For a timber frame building anywhere in Europe, it's an old house.
That's amazing. Yeah,
I still retain some of its original features. So
wow.
one day, next time we meet up for a podcast, I will show you the photograph of the wattle and door, which is about 3 meters away, which forms a party wall between originally a house and another house, but it's now being joined together. But it's all timber framed throughout. It's remarkable bit of architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be awesome. So, here we are again, joined by the wonderful world of paleo information. We have an exciting episode. There has been a good amount of news in the field that has come out in the last few weeks since we recorded. And just a quick few little updates. You may have seen our most recent episode, which is premiering as we record this, and is our first episode edited by our new producer. And we hope you enjoy it and the improvements that are brought along. We want to thank Darren so much for the hard work that he put in. And we look forward to the work that he is going to do going forward and the things that he's going to bring to our podcast. We really hope you guys enjoy what is brought to the table and the improvements that we're bringing. So please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy this podcast.
Yeah, and let us know, because it was really neat.
Know.
Yeah,
yes.
like he's definitely the amount of effort. I mean, not that we don't put effort in, but it was very impressive what he actually has brought to the table when it comes to the details and adding all those extra images and all the pretty transitions, the things that make it extra fun to watch. So yay, Darren.
Absolutely,
and extra special as well.
Yes. So I'm very happy. So thank you, Darren, from all of us to you. So with that being said, there's just one piece of news about the world of paleoanthropology that affects this podcast I wanted to share that I don't even remember if I think I told you to. But starting with season 4 of the Paleo Post Podcast, we will be partnering up with the Archaeology podcast network in a way that will allow us to have them promote our podcast. You will be able to find us in their all podcast feed that they have an RSS feed for and put out weekly. And you will see some of their podcasts being shared on our feed and on the World of Paleoanthropology social media. And we're going to have this fun little collaboration. They have some awesome shows. Even one of my former professors has a show on there. So that's pretty cool. Large range of archaeological topics. I think there's even an ancient aliens show on there debunking some of those myths. So it's a great network. We're going to be part of it I know, right? We're going to be a part of it to help continue to spread the world of paleoanthropology, rock art, human origins, and the work that George and Genevieve do. And we are so excited to do that. And with that, let's go for our quick updates from George and Genevieve. I know George has a really exciting update, so I'm going to let him go second. We'll ask Genevieve first. Yes, we'll ask Genevieve for her updates first. and then
Yeah.
we'll
Oh,
let George trail
he's
off.
bringing the exciting dessert, right? He's the
I know,
what is it, the
right?
creme brulee or something
Yes,
fancy.
yes, yes.
I'm just a boring old piece of sushi or something. I'm an appetizer. No. So, the fish reference will make sense later when we talk about my story that I wanted to talk about. So there we go, tying it together. No, I mean, basically this week, well, George and I are working on one of the biggest things with being a researcher is, again, you go to the field, you collect data, you do things, and then usually, look at George is juggling a billion projects. I consider my children to be rather a big project too. I've got a few different things I'm juggling, so I can't be quite as prolific as George when it comes to all my projects. But George and I did survey work in 2022 in Jordan and Israel, and then I was there again last year doing more prospecting and surveying. And so George and I, we're hammering out articles, we're getting it done. So that's what I was saying. Even this morning, I was very deep in the Amerindian culture from the late Pleistocene in the Jordanian, what was then actually like a Mediterranean woodland environment. So with seriously like oak and pistachio trees, it's hard to even imagine, George, isn't it? When you see what it looks like now.
I know. I mean, what's really interesting is, Genevieve, that I tried with my section of the article I'm writing. I tried to find some idea of paleo-environmental evidence before 3000 BC, and there is very little. So it's very difficult to get your handle on what we're looking at in terms of what was the landscape like. But
I went on a deep dive. I have been down rabbit holes this morning between yesterday and today. I set aside the weekend, and I've got some stuff I haven't even had a chance to share with you yet, but I'm so excited. And then I did a really crazy side quest into ostriches in southern Jordan because I found ostrich engravings when I was there last year.
Yeah.
And but I didn't realize that ostriches were still floating around off and on in the Holocene as well. Like it was more, and I guess it's a subspecies. So I learned about this whole subspecies of ostrich. So this is what happens, I think, as a researcher, is then you're like, well, this is interesting. Maybe I'm going to go down this path for a while. Go learn about ostrich species living in like open semi-arid environments. I think they wander over when the environment is right. But it's neat though to see how the rock art provides you with clues to understand what's going on, right? And I think that's really one of the things George and I have been looking at, is how much the rock art basically stands as a witness to a world that's almost hard to envision when you're standing in somewhere like Wadi Rum now, and just kind of imagining that overlay of like open Mediterranean style forest land with like a big paleo lake. Like I can't even imagine what those formations would have looked like then, like with like greener, like it's really neat. Like gosh, we got to get VR going a little bit more. I would love
100%.
like a VR something like that in the future. I'm dabbling with somebody who may have the skill set and some capacity to do something like that in the future, to be able to actually be like, take me to 25,000 years ago in Wadi Rum. What would this have looked like? Boom, and then you can put on your headset and actually see it. That'd be amazing. So that's basically that's what I've been up to. That and baking muffins. So
yeah, but I will add, Genevieve, two things. That we were in very good hands. We were definitely in good hands when we were there in 2022, and I know you were in 2023. And what's really remarkable is that although we know a lot about Wadi Rum in terms of its recent of history, we know very little about the rock art itself and where it comes from. I mean, we can. I'm starting to look at now, and Odessa, you've already sorted it out, but some of the stuff that we were discovering there was clearly before the Nabateans were running around. And I just somehow think we're onto something quite big here. But again, it's just trying to home in and trying to get that sorted out. But your lead on this one, so I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, exactly. I have the lead hat this time. Oh, well, no, I've got some really good stuff for you, George, too, when it comes to the some really interesting some art that I think for sure is Neolithic, possibly even in the Epipaleolithic. I wouldn't be shocked, because
I would say so.
It's in association with that incredibly old 10,000-year-old Neolithic village. Which again, so funny. nobody noticed that there was rock art right beside the village, which is so funny. Like the locals were like, "Wait, what?" And I was like, "Oh, look, it's an ibex." But yeah. So I mean, I think that's where it's. Oh, we barely scratched the surface.
Exactly.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's such a great place. And I mean, the local collaborators there are amazing too. They're so fun to work with and so welcoming and just so knowledgeable because they know a lot too. If you
Exactly.
start
Yeah.
asking
Yeah.
questions, it's amazing. So, but yes, I'll stop though because now I want to hear. I don't know George's a big discovery announcement, exciting news. So I want to find out too. So I'm ready. Tell us,
All
George,
right.
what's going on?
I want you both to close your eyes and think of
Okay.
Steven Spielberg and Jaws.
Okay.
Dun, 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 la, la, la. Dun, 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 dun. Open your eyes now. Dun, 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 dun.
Oh my
Dun, 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 dun,
goodness.
dun, dun. Yeah, about time. 288 pages of beautiful colour. And what I would say,
Wow.
it's a book which is obviously quite sort of niche in some respects because it deals with my beloved Wales, of course. But a lot of the arguments for building monuments in the Neolithic is just in Britain, between 4,500 and 2,000 BC or thereabouts, about 2,500 years worth of tomb building. A lot of the ideas of burying the dead, you can take this book and take it anywhere around the world where they're building monuments in a Neolithic context. And it's a reprint, but it's not. It's actually a rewrite of a book I did in 2006. And the beautiful thing about this is that ignore the text, ignore the character behind writing the text. My sincere thanks goes to the publisher who really knows his and her onions in terms of, it's a British term that is, his and her onions about publishing and about promoting a good archaeology book. Because the cover sells the book. And
it's gorgeous.
And the way it's been laid out and designed, I couldn't have wished for a better outcome, really. And this is really, in many respects, in complete contrast. Although I don't knock previous publishers, the academic publishing I've done in the past. So, for example, I have in front of me the last book I did, which was a book on prehistoric Portugal with my colleague Sarah. Oh, no, it's a different one. Oh, it's a South American. Sorry, beg your pardon.
I was just going to say that didn't have the right cover.
Yeah. So these are two books which I did. One in 2017, one in 2024, earlier this year. One on Portuguese rock art from the year dot until the Iron Age, and South American book, which is an edited book with colleagues, and it's been done by Routledge, very, very top class, beautiful academic publisher. But they have a set idea about how a book should be presented, and it's, for me, no offense, Routledge, a little bit boring. But I've always complained about that. No, I've had a moan about it anyway. But those books compared with this little beauty.
Yes. I mean that one. That's a pretty sexy cover, George. Like right away, you're like, "Tell me about these tombs."
Exactly. Yeah. And it's for me, it's very exciting because, like I say, it's just nice to see a very, very buyable book. I'll even buy it myself.
Yeah. I know. So, well, I need my signed copies, sir. So
don't you worry.
Your names are on one each. Don't worry about that.
Yay!
Yeah. So that's
okay. Good.
So that's been the highlight of my week, really, in many respects. But behind that, I'm now just about to organise with my colleagues in Portugal, Fernando Coimbra, he's professor at IPT, and Dragos Giorgio from Romania, who's also connected to IPT. We're doing a big Archaeoacoustics project in caves. And one of the things we're going to be looking at is obviously the sound, but also resonance, looking at the hard science of sound in caves. Because one of my theories is that, and the thing I'll be talking about at a conference in 2025, because we're getting me years here sorted out. But there's a conference in Indonesia in the latter part of the year. And we're running a session there on Archaeoacoustics. So if anybody's listening and they want to come along to it, please come along for it, and I'll send you all the details that you need. But it's the US IPP conference, and we've got a session there on Archaeoacoustics. And the one thing I'm really interested in is this idea, this concept of moving through a cave, a big cave system. How do you communicate with other people within that cave so you don't get lost? And I whisper that word to you, Genevieve, in particular, rising star.
I was because my brain had already gone there because we talked about that, right?
Yeah. So my view is that yes, we are using guide markers to get through to particular parts of the cave, but why not sound as well? Just a thought. So I'm experimenting with sound in a cave in Portugal which has a very, very long gallery and also a long cave system, and we're going to be sort of recording and just trying out a few ideas to consider. What we would call, in terms of archaeology, intangible heritage, which we can't prove, but it's great fun, as you would say, Genevieve, to consider the idea about how sound, sight, smell, how that resonates within the archaeological record. And that, I dare say, there's something there we can look at anyway. So that's my two big things this week.
I think
congratulations.
Absolutely, yes. Congratulations. I think the sound thing is absolutely fascinating. Two things. First of all, as some of you may know, I'm in the beginning stages of planning to relocate to Portugal to do some studies there. So this is very exciting news to hear, and things that, who knows, might be down the line, but sounds very exciting. Second of all, this makes me think of during my first bachelor's, because yes, I caught people with teeth for some stupid reason. My main focus was more cultural anthropology versus biological, because that's just what the university had. And the focus was South America and pre-Spanish societies, so the Aztec, the Mayan, whatever. And one thing that's fascinating when you start studying these Mayan and Aztec temples and structures is they would have built-in channels where water would go through. And they can only think, archaeologists only can imagine that this water going through was to create a sound, and that sound would help elevate people to different levels of consciousness, to help for rituals, entering the underworld, doing other various things, because as many of us know, going through a doorway often can be a portal into another world. And so once you enter into these subterranean temples that we're still discovering chambers and passages in, there's literally waterways, and they've done acoustic tests on them. And it's just, people have been using sound, as George suggested, for different reasons forever. And it's amazing truly what sound can do. And we just think, we just sit and listen to music, and think about what that does to your mood. I mean, it's amazing. What, if you listen to a happy song, you become happy. You listen to a depressing song, you're more upset. So just imagine being in a cave and you hear these sounds. I mean, to me, it's a truly fascinating topic, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what comes out of that.
Well, and I mean, I think again that because we're so visual in some ways, as a species, like I think we almost default to visual as being the primary way we interact with the world. That, we forget that we do have 5 senses. And then again, when you're in the caves and your vision is dimmed down more, so that you can't rely on it necessarily as much, especially in a time if you're using torches and the lights are flickering, like you can't rely on it as much. But it also, again, creates a different feel. But I'm thinking as well, even things like, chanting, like ecstatic chanting, whatever religious or spiritual tradition, it's the kind of thing that, basically makes the hairs go back up on the back of your neck, right? Like, even if you're not necessarily like actively involved in that spiritual tradition, there are certain sounds and pitches and resonances which very much, I think can push us into a different state, or help us to, like, our senses. It's part of that whole very rich sensorial experience, which I think we can be having in caves in particular. So no, I think that's a fascinating area that's really not been very well studied. So I love
Yeah.
it. There's been a few, but this would be cool. And now with all of the technology at your disposal, oh wow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we've got an archaeoacoustic engineer retired who's professor at the
Of
university.
course you do.
He's
It's
he's
fantastic.
part of the team, and I think it's going to be quite exciting. I mean, I'm always wary of intangible heritage. However, I because of my, I suppose since I've known you, Jen, since we've sort of done have a lot of caves together, you do start to
Yep.
your mind can actually be focused on what we're doing, which is looking at the art, but also you need to look at the environment as well you're in. And some of the stuff that we've been doing, my God, you know, it makes you think about if you didn't have a sports cave with you, or a or somebody who's dealing with the health and safety issues of this, where would you be? And I think I think we're onto something interesting here, which needs to be discussed. And we got luckily we've got the expertise within the university system. So myself, Queenborough, and Dragos were probably going to do, I think, quite an interesting job. And also we got people who are using or have made replicas of Neanderthal flutes and also Paleolithic flutes, which we'll be trying out as well. Again, you might consider it cranky. Good for you, but I just think there's something in it that it does bring archaeology, which can be sometimes a very rigid discipline, with anthropology and ethnography, and I think that's really important. So, luckily for me, my sort of upbringing was archaeology and anthropology, and I'm going to be using the anthropology as a get out clause. So, for all you skeptics.
But I think though it's like with the shamanism though, right? Which I don't want to get too far down this because we could do a whole thing on, but the idea that our eyes have physiological parameters, which is that the human eye can only create so many different shapes, right? Like with the sort of that like there's an external limiter that is not to do with culture. It's not to do with like our time and place in history. Like it's just a physical limitation of the human body, so to speak, if you want to call it that. Like not like in a bad way, but it's just this is the parameters of what we can see if we close our eyes and either poke on our eyeballs, or if we're in an altered state of consciousness. There's only so many shapes we can see. And so I think with the sound, that there is a similar thing. Our ears can only hear a certain range of sounds. There may be certain sound, was that hertz, megahertz? Like there's probably certain hertz ranges which may very well resonate particularly well with the human eardrum. Like, do you know what I mean? Like there may be some biological basis that you can draw on for why we like the sounds of a flute, or why do we like the sound of a drum, or like, do you know what I mean? Like that there may be the ability to kind of draw from other disciplines to actually look across and see if there is an affinity cross culturally. Like, is there a reason why so many of us like bass, right? Whether it's like boom boom, like sort of speaker bass, or like bass guitar. Like, why is it that bass is something we're very drawn to, or like, again, certain types of chanting, or like I have a feeling that if with all of the different disciplines at our disposal now, and our ability to kind of synthesize all that kind of stuff into one, that there may be some really interesting biological basis for there being certain affinities that humans as a species have. Yeah, I guess that's what I'm trying to say. But there you go. But we can go off on a tangent, but I want to hear about what Seth wants to tell us about, right?
Yes. So for our first news story for this episode, there was something truly unique, truly amazing that came out, I think this week even. And it's one of those stories that really gives you hope of what the future will hold, and I'll get to that in a moment. But in 2020, near Siberia's, and excuse my pronunciation, Bagyalika River, researchers unearthed a remarkably preserved juvenile Homo cub. or Scimitar-Toothed cat, dating to approximately 37,000 years ago. Keep that date in mind. Keep that date in mind. This
it's a little
specimen,
kitty.
yes, you should see the pictures. And Darren, if you're listening, put some pictures of this kitty up right here. Put those toe
Oh my
beans up.
gosh.
We want to see those toe beans. All
Yes,
right.
please.
So in 2024, in scientific reports, the study was reported in unprecedented insights into the species' physical characteristics and adaptations. The cub's short, thick, and dark brown fur with longer hair on the back and neck, and the presence of 2 rows of vibrae or whiskers on the upper lip suggests early development of these features for the cold, snowy environments. Notably, the wide, rounded paws lacking a carpal pad indicate adaptations for traversing snowy terrain. This discovery marks the first recorded presence of a Homotherium in the Upper Pleistocene of Egypt, expanding our understandings of its geographical distribution and ecological adaptations during that period. So, we, and you'll see pictures, literally have this cub that is 37,000 years old, and it is perfectly preserved. Now,
Oh, its little fur and cuteness.
yes.
Yeah.
Now that is amazing, and all of that is amazing, and I want you all to think about the implications of that. But what I want to talk about is what, like I said, the implication. So this is 37,000 years ago. If we recall from our last episode, our previous episode, Soren, the Neanderthal, went extinct 42,000 years ago. That's not a large gap. So when are we finding a frozen Neanderthal? Is Xeno Man anyone? Like, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
It will happen,
I'm waiting
yeah.
for it.
Yeah.
I'm like some poor fellow that fell into was walking on a lake and fell in. Like, I mean, it's going to happen. We're going to find one. 37,000 years old, mummified Homotherium cub, perfectly preserved, whiskers, hair, everything. So why not a human?
Yeah.
It's going to happen. We just haven't found them yet.
And it was found in the permafrost, wasn't it, Seth?
Yes. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And I think as we're seeing global warming occurring rapidly in this world, I mean, I refer to, and I remember this when I was undergraduate, the discoveries made on Wrangel Island, which is above Siberia in the Arctic Circle, and they found there a lot of. I mean, the thing was attracting ivory hunters was the fact that there was a lot of mammoth stuff being found on Wrangel Island, which apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the last bastion or the last defense for mammoths to be roaming around without the threat of being over hunted. And
that would make sense.
Well, they survived on Wrangel Island until 2,800 BC. At a time,
was it an island then?
It's an island, yeah, Wrangel Island.
Oh,
no, was it an island then?
It was an island then.
Okay.
And it survived until 2,800 BC when the pyramids were being constructed. So it was the last haven for but eventually, obviously, they were obviously predated by us modern humans, and they obviously died out. But that date of 2,800 is quite interesting. It's very, very recent in terms of mammoth. And again, one other little fact was, if I remember rightly, in an Oxford quarry, they actually uncovered mammoth as well, going to around about 8,500 BC. So again, just tells you about pretty late indeed. And but nothing like the saber-toothed tiger cub that you've got at 37,000.
Okay, no, I was just going to say, I remember reading an article a few years ago about Neanderthal. They found a Neanderthal site up in the Arctic Circle from about 60,000 years ago. So they were up in the kind of area, which is exactly where my brain went too. It's so funny. We didn't even pre-discuss this, but my brain instantly went, bodies. With hair and skin and clothes and maybe tattoos and who knows what they have and like grave goods and like literally, oh my gosh, the snapshot it would provide because of all those perishable materials that we normally don't get to keep. And I mean, even better if it's a burial, because I mean, a burial would be phenomenal. But yeah, and so Neanderthals there is evidence in different periods of Neanderthals being up more in that region. So you know what I think? Maybe it's just because I have a sniffy dog. My dog's not, he himself is not a search and rescue dog, but he has many litter mates and other relatives who do search and rescue and all these other things. I still think, I was half joking with a friend of mine who does television, that I was like, we should do a show with cadaver dogs up in the permafrost and see if we can go find old burials. Because seriously, the dogs would they not be able to find it though, right? Like, I don't think the age would matter if.
I think
right?
I mean,
I'm just saying,
with the ice block it, I think is, with the it's the only.
But if the permafrost is melting it, though, right? Because you kind of want to make sure you find them before it's too late. But oh
That's
my gosh,
true,
I was half joking, but but then you can see my TV friends like, I was like, well, I'm not really.
Hold on,
need like a good, right, like sniffing the ice, or I don't know. You can have some. I'm sure you can come up with some cool title for it. But seriously, I think it's almost a matter of time. I would say at this stage, especially up. I think Siberia is probably going to be the best bet, because there's so much, like, especially with the Gravettian, and that huge culture that literally spanned like 3,000 kilometers across there, right? Like, it went from basically like the Czech Republic all the way through to the Kamchatka Peninsula. And there was settled villages, like this is even like 30,000 years ago, that there would have potentially been more people being buried in locations, right? Because we've certainly found the burials a little bit further south, where obviously that's just skeletal remains now. But some of them, maybe the ones a little bit further to the north, in that Siberian area, I mean, maybe some of them survived, that would be absolutely amazing. So yeah, I think it's just, I'm hopeful it's a matter of time, because wow, like I said, it's basically full body chills. I can't even imagine, I mean, think about Otzi and how amazing he is at 5,000, and how much we've learned.
Yeah.
Including, I would like to point out all the geometric markings all over him in tattoo form, which are really fascinating.
Absolutely.
And like, where did that tradition come from? How far back does it go? Like, I mean, oh my gosh. So yeah, the things we could learn if we had access to soft tissue and perishable materials would be mind-blowing. So, but in the meantime, we will make do with our adorable little kitty cat, and some happy cat moments.
I'll bring you up to the most recent as well, which is Irving and Mallory, who, and this is a lovely story, very, very quickly. So it's an MB notes, but Irving and Mallory did part of a big expedition, British expedition, to conquer Mount Everest in 1924, and it's believed they may have got to the summit, took some photographs, and then fell to their deaths. And then along comes Sherpa Tenzing and Sir Edmund Hillary, who conquer Everest in 1953. However, they found Mallory's remains about 15, 20 years ago. They've just found Irving's remains and his boot with his foot in it. And so they know it's him because they've done the DNA analysis on him.
Yeah.
But somewhere lurking is a camera. This is the beautiful thing. The camera, or I think maybe two cameras, in fact, which are Kodak Brownie cameras. And in those cameras are two films which can be processed, Kodak tell us. And we will work out once and for all whether they did get to Everest before Hillary did, in 1924 rather than 1953. So it's really a very tantalizing story, but it just tells you the preservation qualities of permafrost and ice. And so yes, I mean, what you both are looking for is this idea of a Neanderthal, either who straight off went into the wrong crevasse at the wrong time. And that may give us some more clues about the extent of Neanderthals, because remember, in the certainly in the British Isles, I don't like using the UK, but in the British Isles, we certainly have, evidence of Neanderthals, but it counts for 6 teeth, and that's it. That's all we've got.
Right, we were talking about that.
Yeah, so I think
So
the permafrost of Siberia, uh, maybe the southern extreme of the permafrost, will give us some clues. And also, Jen, I'm looking at you and Canada as well, because we do know that there are waves of modern humans coming across the Bering Sea into the Americas, and it's more than likely that we will in time find within the Canadian Arctic Circle evidence of modern humans moving around. You never know.
Well, we have Bluefish Cave, which is up inside the Arctic Circle, and they've got dates up there of 24,000 because it was so weird. They're literally that's like for our listeners and viewers, so that's like basically like the glacier. Well, we're in the middle of an ice age, and yet there is a weird ice-free refuge area up in the Arctic Circle. The environment is so crazy, hey? And so these people lived up in the Arctic Circle 24,000 years ago. We've got stone tools and evidence of them living up there. My colleagues who actually work up there and the First Nations up there have actually, George, they've actually invited us to go to go do some prospecting to see if there's any.
Where's my passport?
Dude, with you, this is even more fun. The only way to get up there is by helicopter. Like, we would have to do archaeology by helicopter, which would be so fun. But no, I'm serious. Like, I know the folks at the Beringia Center Museum up there. I've done a lecture for them before, and they were really interested in partnering with us because, of course, they've done the archaeology part, but they're not the rock art people, right? And so it's on my list of things that I would really love to do. So I mean, obviously, you'd have to be a part of that expedition. But I think that might be a summer project.
Yeah.
I think there's a narrow window when the ice is, it's warmer, but all the bugs haven't come. I think there's like a window in May when there's like the time you go before, because afterwards all those bugs come to life.
The midges, yeah.
These are big ones that take out chunks. So yeah, we want to. Very angry bugs up there. But yeah, so I mean, I think there's that area in the north is very underexplored by comparison, and I mean, the amount of things waiting to be found I can't even imagine.
Speaking of things that have been found, why don't we transition to Genevieve's story, which is very interesting about a piece of rock art or carving. What did you tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, speaking of, new technology and also re-examining things that we've already had for a while. So this is an article that just came out. It was a joint project with Durham University in the UK and Monrepo, which is a really amazing advanced, very technical archaeological experimental archaeology, and it is located in Germany. This is a partnership between them that they did this project, but they've got all sorts of neat, very high-tech stuff there, like computer art, not computers, but robot arms controlled by computers that will throw spears so that they can actually gauge the how much impact force. They've got it's like forensics. It's I almost think it reminds me of in James Bond or something like that, when they go to the high tech spot with all the yes, it's like that, but for archaeology. That's basically what Monrepo is. And so one of the things they've been working on there is the Gunnersdorf plaquettes. So a plaquette is basically, it's a portable piece of art that's like a little stone slab. And in this case, so Gunnersdorf is a site in Germany, and they've recovered more than 400 of these little slabs that have engravings on them. And so they've known about the Gunnersdorf slabs themselves, or the plaquettes, for quite a while. But they'd always focused on that there's all sorts of different animals, literally hundreds of animal images, and one of the things they're best known for are these very stylized female figures, which to me look an awful lot like a stylistic variation of a claviform. So again, that very they're very, very stylized, very minimized style of female that they're depicting there, and which again makes sense. Gunnersdorf is a later site, so we're talking Magdalenian. So I think there was supposed to be, George, around 13,000 to 15,000.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of the Gunnersdorf period. So towards the end of the Ice Age, towards the end of the Paleolithic. And keeping in mind, of course, and this is what we come back to so often, that just like anywhere in the world, over time, you're going to see development, you're going to see change. And I think we are seeing an interesting process starting to take place in Europe as the ice sheets are receding, as we're moving towards like the end of the Ice Age period and moving into the Mesolithic and Neolithic, which we'll get to with George soon. But as we're moving towards this, we're seeing the environment is different. People are going to be interacting with the landscape differently, different culture groups, different priorities. And this is where, certainly in the research that I've done with geometric signs, particularly, we also start to see more what I'd call more of these linear images, like the very beautiful, filled out, like detailed artistic drawings that I really think of these sort of works of art, like a Lascaux or Altamira, like those things. You're seeing less of those, and you're starting to see them almost be like reduced to these lesser lines or to being more stylized or more schematized. And Gunnersdorf is a really good example with all sorts of interesting things, though again, there are some lovely animal images here too. But the things like those female figures is an interesting example of what we might be seeing, something becoming more iconic and less of an actual, like just a drawing, that it's becoming more of a symbol, right? So neat stuff. Gunnersdorf is an interesting site that I just think is cool in general for my work. So let's make sure I've got my notes to make sure I get this right. So they've known about these 400 plus slabs for a while, and like I said, we've literally got, let's see, we got reindeer, horses, we've got mammoth, we've got rhinos, we've got tons of stuff. So there's lots of really interesting things going on here. We've got the human figures. And then there was ones, of course, with geometric or non-figurative abstract marks on them, but they'd never really been identified. So they used a brand new technology that is called reflectance transformation imaging. So what that basically is, so RTI for short, and it's a different style of photographing is basically what they're doing, which is allowing them to get almost like a 3D image, but using it's a different type of photography. So again, they're using reflection, they're using light differently in order to bounce it off of it and create these almost like stereoscopic images, I think is kind of how it worked. I have a colleague who's worked over there. And so that was how I had the RTI described to me. And so with this much higher resolution, three-dimensional, with like, so we're seeing the depth on some of these abstract images. There's 8 slabs or plaquettes in particular, which had these grid patterns on them. And they've realized that these grid patterns are overlaying fish motifs, which has led them to wonder if what we're seeing is fish in nets. So, which would be really, really cool, though, because one of the things for viewers or listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with like Paleolithic art, like for sure, lots of like there's lots of different cultures and art traditions around the world where they depict like real world activities, like we're hunting things, we're in a village, we're like pounding grain or whatever it is they're doing, right? But Paleolithic art does not have that traditionally. We have 3 categories. We have animals, we have humans, and we have these geometric signs. And Paleolithic art is known for its absence of many activities, right? Like you're like, where's village life? Where's the people doing things? Where's regular day stuff? And this is where, in the past, theories have been like, oh, well, maybe it's because this was all just very high religious art, right? So why would you show more mundane, boring activities if these are the gods or the mythology or the, the shamanistic things that we're seeing in caves? But the other question, which is certainly one of the things I've been trying to tease out and sort of understand better, is it just maybe that we haven't recognized those activities, or maybe we just haven't recognized because of the way they've styled it, because of the more iconic schematic way of depicting, because it's 2-dimensional, not 3-dimensional, maybe we're not catching it. And so to me, I'm like, of course we're depicting, catching fish in nets. We know there was nets and weaving thanks to sites like Dolne Vestinici, where the clay there has actually had imprints of different weaving patterns fired into the clay that they were making into figurines and other items up there. So we already knew, and that's 25 to 30,000. So we know they had woven items that far back. And then, of course, we've got some examples of rope that have been found in a couple places, as mind-blowing as that is. So we know that they had the capacity to weave, to braid, to work with these materials. And so, I mean, we've often speculated that they would have had nets or other, these other woven sort of items that they could have used as, baskets or to do hunting or netting or things like that. And so this could be the first kind of documented, well-supported example of, gee, we have a fish behind a grid, which looks an awful lot like a net. Which would be really, really cool, and circles back really nicely to some of the early 1900s theories of the fact that some of the other things we're seeing, I'm thinking of Ruffignac. I'll make sure I find a photo and we'll get Darren to put one up. I think I'm thinking sites like Ruffignac, where the mammoth appeared to be behind these overlapping grid-like, almost like a tectiform, and it's been seen that those could also have been a depiction of an animal that they were hunting or driving into a trap. And so, I mean, I think, again, that comes to the question of, has it been in front of us this entire time, but we just weren't recognizing what it was? And so I think that's what makes the story really fun. So there we go. There's my little very excited trip down, the hunting and gathering activities of the Paleolithic, and that maybe those activities really are being reflected on the walls and in the portable pieces, but we just didn't catch it before. So yay, Monrepo and Durham. Amazing study. Congratulations to all.
Absolutely. And I think that does bring up a really good point of what we've talked about before, and that's our world today is different than the world of our ancestors, and we might view things differently, not pick up on certain things that might have been obvious to our ancestors. I mean, I think there was, and this isn't one of the stories we're covering today, so I'm going to be very brief, but we have cave paintings of woolly rhinoceros with humps on them. And just recently, I don't remember if they found one or it was DNA or whatever, but they confirmed that the woolly rhinoceros had a hump. And I shared the story, and people commented like, okay, well, didn't we know this? Like, they've made cave paintings of that. Like, why would they make it? Like, they're not just making stuff up on the walls. They're for a reason. A lot of it's practical even. So they see the world differently than we might see it today. But that doesn't mean wasn't it? But anyway, yes, very good study.
No, that's perfect, Seth. But it comes back to what George and I were talking about earlier with Wadi Rum too, or like the ostrich, or like the idea that maybe we have underestimated the power of these rock art images to bear witness to what that world looked like, that they are reflections of these people's lives, and that they're not like disconnected or just a small group of people, but that these are, in a way, the illustrations that accompany these like very deep chapters in human history. And so that if we can understand them better, then we will learn so much about these people. But you're right, that we need to be open to recognizing that maybe we're maybe just, if you've got a bunch of rock art researchers and none of them have ever netted fish, maybe it just doesn't occur to them to think that, right? I think that's kind of, again, where you could be, you can sometimes run into that. So it actually might be really helpful to speak with different groups of folks around the world who maybe still practice some of these lifestyles and traditions, to see if they have some other ideas, right?
Yeah. Yep. Talking, like, for instance, I'm part of a rock art research group for I'm getting my directions mixed up. Yes, East Africa. And a lot of it involves the local people, because they still make the rock art. And who better to know what the rock art means than the descendants of the people who originally made it? And the tradition is literally like, it's continuous. It hasn't stopped. So, and so many anthropologists up until now, and we're getting a little bit into like colonialism and white superiority and whatnot, disregarded all of that because they're savages, they're whatever, they don't know what they're talking about. We know better. We have high art. We can figure out what this means. Just ask them. They'll tell you what it means.
Well, it reminds me of that the interview we did with Aaron Mazel a few months ago, Seth, and that was actually quite telling, because he's got a very, very different, very, very good attitude towards understanding how the ethnography and talking to people
Mhm.
helps us to work out what is going on in some of the caves that he was looking at in the Drakensberg in South Africa, for example.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely not an
Yeah.
everyone thing. There's definitely been people who've done it right, but just
Oh gosh, of course.
yeah, of course.
It's just it's not. But also, I mean, again, if you go back to the early 1900s, that's what early rock art researchers proposed. Was they were looking out at the world and suggesting, hey, these human figures that have all these bushy things coming off of them, I wonder if they're purposely wearing camouflage like some of the hunter-gatherer groups did, where they actually wear all the grass on themselves and stuff in order to blend into the landscape when they're hunting. Like, so they were, and again, you always want to take these things with a grain of salt, because obviously this is, 15,000 years ago at Gunnersdorf, or, there's other, 30, 40,000 year old sites. But there are certain things that might make sense. And I think that's where the key now in our era is that the middle of the 20th century, I feel like researchers got a little like, how can we know anything about anything? And so the only thing we're going to talk about, we're not going to talk about that stuff anymore. We're going to talk about only like the nuts and bolts. Like, we're going to talk about how many bones we found. We're going to talk about the tools. We're going to talk about, as George said, the tangible things that we can put our fingers on and say, this is an item that I can describe, I can weigh it, I can measure it, and it has, there is sort of concrete stuff about it that I can discuss. And I'm not going to talk about all that subjective, abstract stuff over there, because then I'm just going to get attacked for why my theories aren't, do you know what I mean? Like, I think that if we stick to the concrete stuff, we can keep our heads down and go do our archaeology, and everything will be fine, and poo-poo on all this analogy nonsense, right?
Yes.
And so I feel like our job now is to bring it back in a careful and thoughtful way, and recognize that actually, again, like the first people in Australia, like, I mean, oh my gosh, so much of their art, they have things like animal tracks that they depict regularly. I guarantee there's animal tracks on the cave walls in Europe. It makes perfect sense. But right? Oh my god! And I'm thinking to Cognac. There's literally an ibex, and then there's like little marks right beside the ibex that look like ibex tracks in the snow. It's probably right there. It's so interesting how the gaze and the even like almost the blind spot sometimes of the researchers have directed the way things have gone. And so this is where, it's a great study and a really good reminder that there's probably lots of other real world activities floating around out on cave walls too. And so, we need to, there's so many sites and so many things we could be revisiting. So it's exciting.
Absolutely. And with that,
speaking of exciting,
I think we will,
George.
Yes, speaking of exciting, let's transition to George's
transition being the operative word.
Yes, transition. Yes.
What I'm going to be looking at, what I have been looking at, for quite some time, in fact, is this idea of transition. And I remember one professor telling me one day, he says, one day we're hunting and gathering, and the next day we're doing farming. And it doesn't just happen like that. It's a long transition. And so the one thing that I was interested in looking at when I was way back postgraduate days was this idea about transition. And it's very rarely talked about because people still talk about the Neolithic and they talk about Mesolithic and the Upper Paleolithic, but they don't understand that there is a lag between those periods where things are merging in. Some people embrace, for example, farming, some people don't. And the one thing I remember, the one thing I've written a lot about is this idea about the idea of the transition between the Mesolithic and the Neolithic in northwestern Europe. And it occurs around about, and again, this is the transition bit, between 3,500 BC and around about 5,500 BC. So there's about a 2,000 year lag. And people are now probably getting their textbooks saying that ain't right. It starts off around about 4,000 BC and that's it. Well, if you think about the idea, and one of the one word I really enjoy is the Erteböller, and the Erteböller is the last phase of the South Scandinavian Mesolithic. It dies out around about 3,200. However, by 3,200, the rest of Europe have embraced with open arms Neolithicization. So they're farming. However, the Erteböller are very, very clever because they take on bits of that Neolithicization, but ignore the rest of it. So it's still essentially a hunter-gatherer society. This is in Denmark and southern Sweden. But they embrace pottery. They embrace social organization. They have their own artistic endeavor in the form of portable art on bone, antler, and amber. And on that bone, antler, and amber are a series of marks. Genevieve, you would love it because they're geometric forms, mainly geometric forms, but we do have human figures on there. We have animal figures. Some of the amber art, which is shaped hunting animals such as bear, such as elk.
Oh, I've seen some of that. It's gorgeous. Yes, I've seen some of the pendants and stuff.
Yeah, and the Baltic comes from the Baltic Sea. So places like Estonia, Latvia, Estonia, northern Germany, Denmark, southern Sweden, you'll find these pieces. And there are about 400 pieces altogether. But really, it's something which is essentially, when you pick it up, it's essentially Mesolithic. However, the contradiction is that the people using this stuff and making this stuff are not quite firmly embraced, or have not quite firmly embraced the Neolithic ideology of building tombs, making pottery, sedentarianism, I can't say the word, but coming together in settlements, nucleated settlements, and staying put. And this is despite the fact that that Neolithicization has really taken over most of Europe, including the British Isles at that time. And so what you have to ask yourself is it going on elsewhere? Well, yes, it is. It's going on in the Danube, in Serbia. So the Iron Gates Gorge and the Penskivir is a good example of that.
Yes. There's some amazing sites there.
Exactly, where they got their own. And talking of fish, there's a lot of sculptures in some of the houses that have been excavated.
Lipinski-Vir! I know exactly that's the big type site over there. It's cool.
Exactly, which have fish faces, or very much, Botox in lips. They look like that. So they're very much human faces, but with fish-like features. So that's one area. Then other areas is in terms of the British Isles is Northern Ireland, place and Western Scotland, a thing called the Oban culture, and this is something which Steve Mythen looked at in the 1980s and 1990s. And basically, what we've got there is a really firmly established Mesolithic society with a Mesolithic economy, which is surrounded by Neolithicization. So again, some really interesting things going on there. It's usually within the fringes of what I would call the northern frontier of Europe. So in Scotland, Western England, a little bit of Wales, a little bit of Ireland, certainly Scandinavia. And this is where it gets really interesting, is that when we start to look at the art and the geometric forms we've got there, and they're very simple geometric forms, zigzag lines, chevrons, which are being engraved onto bone and antler. These date to a little bit earlier than the Erteböller, to the Megalomos and the Congomos. So we're talking about 8,500 BC to 6,500 BC, and then the Congomos to the Erteböller, another 1,000 years. So there's a lot of things going on. And what's really interesting is, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that at the time before 6,500 BC, Britain was attached to Europe. And so we have Doggerland. And so you've got people moving back and forth, or trading, or contact and exchanging different ideas, what's going on in the British Isles, and they're taking those to their tribal communities in Scandinavia, southern Scandinavia, and vice versa. So it really is an interesting sort of area we are thinking about. And if you take that economy and that pattern of transition and put it to other areas in prehistory, you're starting to see interesting patterns emerge, in that it's not straight cut. It's not a straightforward sort of changeover from one culture to another. It's a very, very slow process that we have to think about. And again, I think it's something which prehistorians have made a big mistake of when they talk about, for example, the Magdalenian, for example, from one date to another date, not considering that it's geographic and it's chronological, that certain things are still happening in the megalomos, which go into a later phase, and likewise in the earliest switchovers from the megalomos to wherever we are in Europe. And it also applies to the rest of the world as well. So the one thing, the one book I've never seen is a book called Transition, and that's a book which needs to be written. This idea of
we should
how,
do it.
I know. Yeah, but
the
trouble is, Jen.
Time for another book. I know.
Trouble is, Jen, I've only got another 30 or 40 years to live, and I know it'll take me much further than that. That's the big problem.
I'm already your sort of your schedule's already full. Okay, yeah. So first of all, I'm really glad you brought that up. I think about that as well in many different ways. So first of all, I agree, which is that it's not like suddenly somebody issued a memo one day. I was like, okay, everyone, let's get on board. We're leaving this behind and we're shifting to being this new culture, and everybody's like, hooray, we're changing. So obviously, yeah, it's these very slow things that happen. And also these things don't usually happen without there being some sort of push factor. Like if it ain't broke, you don't fix it, which means if everything is stable and fine, we don't find a lot of cultural change because it's working. Why would you, right?
Well, it's usually just like the Earth Spoiler.
And that's kind of where I was going to flag. Yeah. No, so again, they had the resources to be able to keep doing what they were doing. And so it's usually only when there's something that's pushing at us or some factor like major environmental change, like at the end of the Ice Age, which I'm presuming is because I was going to ask you, George, just for the sake of listeners, viewers, and also just to clarify for me too, because it's kind of an area I dabble in, but it's not my area as much. So the Mesolithic, the difference between the Mesolithic and the Paleolithic, is it the transition to the Holocene? Is it more that it's an extension of hunting and gathering that goes beyond the end of the Ice Age, but we're giving it a new name because we're no longer in the Ice Age Pleistocene Paleolithic time period. We're now in what we call the Holocene. The end of the Ice Age has taken place. The ice sheets have melted. And so now we're talking about this hunter-gatherer groups, but with a new world around them, which is why we're giving them a new name. Would that be a good way to
I think it's the best way of putting it, because I mean the changes are so complex. I did a study on sea level rise in northern Scandinavia many years ago, and you saw changes within 50-60 kilometers.
It's a snap of the fingers
because of the dramatic changes that were happening because of the ice was melting so quickly. I mean, there's a colleague of mine who's just retired recently, Mike Walker, one of my big heroes, and he did a lot of work on glaciology in the British Isles, in particular up in Scotland, and he says, and I quite agree with him, we have a slow onset of the Devensian at 40,000 and between 70 and 40,000. So it's 30,000 years of change, very, very slowly. But when the ice goes,
this is the ice really sheets quickly. Getting bigger and bigger. Yeah, but when it's almost like it hits a tipping point, right? And then you get like ice dams breaking, and then you get huge quantities of water just like wiping out landscapes. Like there was mega floods on the west coast of North America around 15,000 years ago. I think it's called the Missoula mega floods, where again these huge inland glaciers were literally being held back by an ice plug. The ice plug melts, breaks, whatever happens, and then boom, and you end up with things like the Scablands, which I think is like Oregon, Washington. It's in that area where it's like there's these huge boulders just randomly across the landscape because the amount of water that went smashing down, I think, was it through the Columbia River Gorge? Like it went, I can't even imagine. Like anybody who lived in this path would have been wiped out. And this is what I was wondering about with the grouchy old holdouts for the hunter-gatherer lifestyle, because I was thinking of things like mega floods and this idea of rapid change. And then also, I know up north of me here, so in British Columbia where I live, and up along the Pacific Northwest, there's evidence where water levels were rising at some point so quickly that they were there's evidence of villages being moved every single generation, that there's 3 villages in a row, and 2 of them are now one's in the tidal zone, one's in the intertidal, because the water levels rose so fast that within your own lifespan you would be watching the water come up to your doorstep and you would have to move your whole village. And so I was wondering if your folks there up in the north, the problem was maybe it wasn't stable enough to shift to the Neolithic farming lifestyle because they kept getting flooded out. So maybe it made more sense to be more mobile and more able to move. And so they adopted the good pieces, like, oh, hey, this is a handy thing to have clay containers for stuff. But there's no point in us, putting down roots and like tilling fields and doing all these things because we're going to get flooded out anyways. So maybe because of that margins and because of the rapid change, that might be it. So it could be that there was actually some very compelling reason why they may have even tried it and been like, well, don't think this is for us. That was a lot of work for nothing, right? It'd be interesting to know.
I think in geological time, it's quick, but in terms of community time, it's very slow indeed. And so I think by 6,500 BC, we're still in the hunter-gatherer period. We start to see the North Sea develop, and that was then the British Isles become the British Isles. That landmass stays reasonably stable until now. So very little has changed in terms of the coastline. However, what we've got to think about is that between the Neolithic and the Mesolithic, we have a temperature rise which was 2 to 3 degrees higher than today. So we have, in many respects, it's an ideal landscape for vegetation growth. So we have really good land, we have really good woodland developing, we have very, very good clearance and cultivation occurring right through certainly the early Neolithic. And then before that, these are really good hunting grounds for the new collection of animals coming in, such as wild cattle, wild pig, horse, all the things that weren't there in the Paleolithic are now here in the Mesolithic because of broadleaf woodland coming in, moving from the south into the northern lands of the British Isles. So it's a very, very complex thing. I mean, in many respects, this podcast can't do it justice because it's so complex.
No. I think well, that's our job is our job is to delve below the headlines, to kind of almost give folks some better bullet points to understand a little bit. And then if things are interesting, then, obviously, more delving deeper is required. But I think it's good because so many people don't even know about this, George, that even if we're able to lightly just, make people, like, even if we're asking questions or just getting people to think about stuff they haven't thought about before. I mean, obviously, the amount of knowledge you have in your head about it, my brain instantly went to the Younger Dryas, of course, as well, because then we had that weird snap back to the cold period for 1,000 years, where the Ice Age kicked back in when it was around 12,000 years ago, right? Where we had a weird cold snap that came back. And so, again, the complexity, what's going to really, I have a feeling, be really helpful for this. And this might be a good note to end on, but artificial intelligence, the capacity for it, that if we can feed it all of the paleoenvironmental data, it will be able to build the most insane models for us that really might actually help us understand these environmental dynamics of what's taking place, because it can bring in, the air temperature, water, it can bring in the changes in sea levels, environmental, like all of it, all that pollen data, everything we have. And so
I will end there, Genevieve, and just say, I just hope that AI can help us sort out the paleo environment for Jordan before 3000 BC.
Oh, my friend, it's already been helping me. I'll just tell you that. So, So my trusty companion and I have been delving very deep, and it makes an excellent research assistant. Wait till you see what we've done.
And
yes, it's already well implemented. Yeah.
With that little tidbit of future mystery to come, I think we will leave off on this episode of the Paleo Post Podcast. I think it has been a wonderful, maybe a little lengthy episode. I think you guys will enjoy it. We talked about a great deal of things, but I think it was all extremely
Mhm.
interesting, fun, and engaging. If you learned something, if you liked what we talked about, if you want to know more, if you have questions, which some interesting ones actually came in while we were recording that we'll talk about on the next episode,
Ooh,
please
fun.
send them in to worldofpaleoanthropology@gmail.com, and we will talk about them and answer them on the show once we get them. Otherwise,
Love it.
guys, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to the two of you, as it always is, listeners. Wonderful that you get to experience this discussion, I think. Genevieve,
Yep.
I will hand it to you to say your goodbyes for the episode.
Oh, it's so short. My brain's already working in 10 different directions, but I will leave it with this. This truly is, there's a reason why. I mean, I hope this comes through to viewers, but like, we genuinely enjoy doing this. Like, this really is one of the fun times of the week for me, is just that opportunity to just explore and, try out some ideas and brainstorm some things. And because again, we spend so much time as researchers also in our own little ivory tower writing or researching, and it's so important to have these conversations and to do that, because it's the combined brains together, I think, where we start to come up with some really interesting stuff from all these different angles. So truly a pleasure. I'm all inspired now, and I'm ready to go back and continue delving into the environmental questions of Wadi Rum. So we'll let you know, George, what I
Yes.
find.
And George, why don't you end it
Right.
for us?
Very, very quickly, what she said. And
What she said, yes.
And if you want to get hold of this beautiful, beautiful book for Christmas, Amazon are doing a discount.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Oh,
Links
George,
will be in the description.
congratulations.
There will be a link in
And
the
it's-
description for purchase. Yes.
Yep, totally. So can't wait to read it. It's going to be awesome. Congrats again. It's a big deal writing a book. So well done, you.
It is.
It's a biggie.
Yes.
It was a big one. Yeah.
It's an endeavor. Yeah. So
It is an
hooray.
endeavor,
Well, there we
yeah.
go. Goodbye, everybody.
Yes.
Enjoy.
With that, we will say farewell. Goodbye, everyone. Have a wonderful, if it's a weekend, and if it's a week, enjoy your week. Till next time.
Exactly.